Okay. It's recording. Okay. I did get the Christmas invitation party out. If you saw it, I know some people responded. And if you click down, there's a section that says what to bring. And I don't really need 10 of each. I just want everybody to pick something different. So if you see everybody's picking side dishes, pick a dessert. If everybody's picking appetizers, pick a side dish. That was the purpose of that, and we look forward to that. That's December 10th. And we will get started. We are on week number 19 of Matthew, and we're still on chapter 18, which sort of bugs me. Because I'm a number person, I want to be on chapter 19. But where we left off last time, remember, we're in section 4, and this is a section where it's about the expectations of who the Messiah is supposed to be. And we went through the first part of it. The last part, chapters 18 through 20 are Jesus talking to the disciples and teaching them about the upside down nature of the kingdom. And we'll definitely see that today. Where we all left off last week, we talked about that verse that has now appeared twice in Matthew, that says, verse 18 in chapter 18, that says, "Truly I tell you, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." And that followed a discussion about what you do if one of your fellow believers have sinned against you or have been a stumbling block against you. What do you do? And it talked about how you go to him in private, him or her in private, and if that doesn't work, you bring 2 or 3 people with you and discuss. And as I told you, this was last week, I struggle with the idea. I don't think that ever works. I haven't seen it work. And Scott kept telling me, you're missing the point, and this week will be the payoff, and this week is the payoff. I was looking at it, and we'll see it as we start the next section. It's not about getting someone told. It's about the other side of the equation. It's about forgiving. And so I'll give you
And we at 15 is verse 15 is where that begins. If your brother sins against you, and then there's this whole long set of instructions. And I realized that we're going to start today in 24, right?
no, 19.
21.
19.
19?
Oh, no, you're right. You're at 21.
21.
You're right.
And Peter comes to Jesus and says, okay, well, Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother who sins against me? So you notice this is connected. 15 begins, if your brother sins against you. And Peter listened to all of that, and he understood it to be about forgiveness. And the idea of what you bind on earth and what you loose on earth. This week, Mary said, we were talking about it, and she said something that I thought was pretty fabulous, that bind and loose is what you hold on to versus what you let go of. And I realized it's hard still for us to start on this question that Peter raises without talking a little more about forgiveness. This thing about you go to people, if your brother sins against you or your sister, you go to them privately and you tell them so. One of the things I think a question that should be asked is, if you follow this, if someone offends you and you go to them and tell them, what do you want them to do? What is it you want by doing this? Do you need them to grovel? Do you need them to feel the pain that you felt? I mean, why would you do this? And one thing that's worth mentioning is it's possible to forgive someone without going through all of these steps. You could just let go of it. But you go to them, you go through this whole process, and if they do whatever it is you're looking for, if they apologize, if they grovel, if they go through whatever that you need, aren't you sort of obligated to forgive them? I mean, and there are a lot of people who don't want to do that part. They want to go get them told, and then maybe I'll come back in 6 months and get you told again, and they never let go. This section is very much about forgiveness, and it's really, really important. And we're going to see why as we go into this with Peter. You want to start with 15?
21.
or 21?
And when we start with 21, the first word is then. And this is one of those things that hit me also, that, when you're in a church and someone is going to read the gospel or whatever, they would have started with Peter came to Jesus. They wouldn't start with the word then. And that word then is really important because it shows you that it is tied to the section before. So chapter 18, verse 21. Then Peter came to Jesus and asked, Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother who sins against me? Up to 7 times? You want me to stop there?
Yeah, probably. So we see two things. We see that this is connected to what he's just been saying. And he's talked to him about this process you go through and whatever you hold on to and whatever you let go of. And Peter says, okay, all right, I get it. And he understood that it's about forgiveness. How many times must I forgive someone who offends me? As many as 7. And you can see he's saying that would be ridiculous. I mean, twice, maybe 3 times. And after that, I'm going to hold a grudge. He's looking for a way out. So as many as 7, I could do that. And Jesus says, no, not, and I guess.
Jesus answered, I tell you, not just 7 times, but 77 times.
And there's this big debate over whether that's 70 times 7, which is 490, or 77. It really doesn't matter. What he's saying is there's not a limit to it. It's a number that's big enough. Nobody's going to count 76 times. Okay, I've forgiven 76, 77. Now I'm done with you. Nobody. So the point is, he's saying there's not a limit on this. It reads in the Greek 70 times, and then there's the word 7. I think it means 77, but it really doesn't matter. It's a whole bunch. It is limitless.
Isn't there a element of scandal on here? Where you're not forgiving the trespasser, you're really forgiving yourself if it's blocking you.
Oh, excellent, Gene. Yeah, you have hit the point of this, that you're not necessarily forgiving the trespassers so much as you're getting past the scandal on to yourself. And that's part of the point we want to make today. That's part of the point I was trying to make to Mary as we've gone through this, is that what happens is someone offends you and you hold on to it and it becomes a scandalon. It becomes the thing that separates you from God. It gives you an excuse to be angry and to not be in God's will. And it is very much related to that. This whole thing is one teaching, and it's important to see it. You're correct.
Because of this, verse 23, because of this, the kingdom of heaven is like a king who wanted to settle accounts with his servants.
Let's stop for a minute. He says, because of this. Because of what? He's just told them that that you should forgive 70 times 7 or 77 times. You should just keep forgiving. And he says, because this is true, because there should be no limit to your forgiveness of your brother if they offend you. Because of this, the kingdom of heaven is like, and he does this often, the kingdom of heaven is like, because it's hard for us to understand. And sometimes one of the best, if you can't define something, you start giving examples. You start saying, well, it's like this, and it's like this, and you sort of encompass it. So this is one of those times. This has to do with, there's no limit on the forgiveness. And because of that, the kingdom of heaven is like. You want to read that again? And we'll.
Because of this, the kingdom of heaven is like a king who wanted to settle accounts with his servants. As he began the settlements, a debtor was brought to him owing 10,000 talents. Since the man was unable to pay, the master ordered that he be sold to pay his debt, along with his wife and children and everything he owned. Then the servant fell on his knees before him. Have patience with me, he begged, and I will pay back everything. His master had compassion on him, forgave his debt, and released him.
Let's stop there. So 10,000 talents, that's a measure of weight of gold. 10,000 talents. Mary, you want to tell them what 1 talent is?
1 talent is would have been 20 years of wages. 20 years of wages. So 10,000, it would be like saying you're a billionaire. We can't fathom what that's like, right?
Yeah, I don't understand how much $1 billion really is. And to understand 10,000 talents, that's
10,000 times 20 years of wages.
20,000 years worth of wages for the average worker. And there's no way anybody really gets in debt that deep. He's trying to show you that this man owed a sum that is unthinkable. And we're supposed to get from this that we owe a debt that is unthinkable. We're going to talk more about it, but that's what this is. This man owes 10,000 talents, and the master.
This is another great example of that. When you read the scriptures, many of you have heard the story before, maybe all of you. And when you heard 10,000 talents, if you don't know that a talent is 20 years of wages, it's like he owed some money and he forgave him. But he owes an amount of money that could have never been paid back.
And so this king has the right, and it is, kind of in the law, that you take the man, you throw him in jail until he pays it back, which is never. He is going to be imprisoned forever. Okay? You see the story unfold, and the man begs. He gets down on his knees. He begs. He says, look, have patience with me, and I'll repay it. There's no way he repays this. There's no way he repays 20,000 years. If he could do that, this wouldn't be a big deal. He can't possibly repay it. And it says that the king has compassion on him. We see that same word when Jesus is out and the crowds are around him, and he has compassion on them and he heals them. He has compassion on them. He gets out of remember his cousin John the Baptizer has died, and he wants to sort of get away and have some solitude, and the people are there and they need him, and he has compassion on them, and he puts himself aside and goes to them and begins healing them. It's the same word. It's the same idea. This man's, the king has compassion. Even though this man can never repay the debt, he forgives him, he sends him away, he lets him go instead of sealing him away in jail for the rest of his life.
But
yes.
At first, and I guess you just made the point, but at first it says king and then it says master.
It
Are
does.
they one and the same?
They are. Yeah. I actually said master, and I thought
the text in my interpretation, which is the ESV, says master and it starts with king. So
we have some of those words like Adonai that it means Lord, and it either means God or it can mean an earthly, Lord. Yeah.
Verse 28. But when the servant went out, he found one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 denarii. He grabbed him and began to choke him, saying, pay back what you owe me. So the fellow servants fell down and begged him, have patience with me, I will pay you back. But he refused. Instead, he went and had the man thrown into prison until he could pay his debt. When the fellow servants saw what had happened, they were greatly distressed, and they went and recounted all of this to their master. Then the master summoned him and declared, you wicked servant, I forgave you all your debt because you begged me. Shouldn't you have mercy on your fellow servants just as I had on you? In anger, his master turned him over to the jailers to be tortured until he should repay all that he owed. That is how my heavenly Father will treat each of you unless you forgive your brother from your heart.
So,
first of all, the amount he owes back? 100
denarii. That's a denarius is 1 day's wages for an average worker. So 100 denarii, 100 days worth of wages versus 20,000 years worth. There's no comparison. So the point is, this man has offended the king. He has trespassed against the king to the tune of 20,000 years worth of work, and the king forgives him. And what we see, what Jesus does with this, is that this other guy owes the same servant 100 days worth of wages, and he has him thrown in jail. The man begs and says the same words. This is a parable. This is an analogy, okay? They're not quoting someone. Jesus chooses to use the exact same words. Have patience with me and I'll repay you. It's the same thing that this wicked servant said, and he was forgiven. And what we're supposed to see from this, remember, this is an extension of, it begins, if your brother sins against you. The point is, the things that people do that offend us are small change compared to the debt that we owe God, the forgiveness that we've received. Those are things that are permanent and eternal and enormous. And yet we have a problem when someone trespasses against us, they do some little thing to us. We don't want to let go. We actually have this whole thing that says, go to them first and then go to the, I'll say it again. You don't have to go through all that trouble. You don't have to go to them and do this routine in order to forgive them. The point here is that we are supposed to express the same grace and forgiveness that has been extended to us.
And I think you said, when someone offends you and they do a little thing, this is still 100th day of wages, and it can be a big thing in our eyes. I mean, and it can be big things. I mean, people offend us and sin against us in big ways, and but it's still in comparison.
In comparison, and that is the point here, is about forgiveness, and it ends unless you forgive your brother from your heart. And when we were studying Ecclesiastes, where Solomon, there's a point where he says that forgetfulness is better than forgiveness. And I got some pushback on that, I think, when I got through that. But this is what it's about. When you forgive from your heart, you don't retain it.
Right.
You don't hold on to it. What I have seen is people say, for one thing, saying I forgive you sometimes is one of the cruelest things you can do to someone.
Yeah.
You make a point of saying, well, you're really a scum, but I forgive you. I'm gonna show you how low you are by doing this. And this idea of forgiving from your heart eventually involves forgetfulness. We were in a class, and this is going to become an issue in chapter 19. There was a woman that was distraught. Her and her husband had started seeing each other while they were both married to someone else. And she's basically saying, I don't know how we can ever be forgiven. And there's a point where we're told that God puts our sin as far from us as the east is from the west. Yes? And so this idea of forgiving from your heart means you let go. This whole thing has been about the fact that we, this body, are going to be living in close communion with each other, and we're going to do little things that offend each other. And it's about how do we not let it poison the body. This is a teaching for them, but that's what this is about. And it's one of the hardest things, I think. It's one of the things we struggle with, is being able to forgive, to really let go. And I will, on closing this 18, sort of reiterate, you don't have to go to them and get them told to forgive. And forgetfulness is better than forgiveness.
Chapter 19.
I think this analogy is outstanding. I mean, he starts with, it's like the kingdom of heaven. And he starts with, before you go to the master, you're at a higher level than that.
Yeah.
You're at God the Father. Now we're going to bring it down to the master and servants that you guys see every day. And he's going to say, hey, this guy's got to follow it, and this guy did. And the wicked servant didn't pick up that lesson. And, he paid a price. So I think the teaching is, even at this human level, you've got to play by the celestial rules of the Father. You've got to forgive from the heart.
Well,
Am I correct?
you think, yeah, you forgive from the heart. You think about what must it be like? And I can't really, but God sees us argue with each other. He sees us not forgive each other. And you look at the offense, and the offense might be that you said something, about my shoes. I don't know. These petty little things. And we grab each other by the throat and we want to lock somebody away in jail over these minor offenses. And the point that he is making is, yes, God, we have been forgiven for so much larger offense, an offense that we could never pay back. And the message should be from this wicked servant, he should have remembered that when the guy says, forgive me, be patient with me, and he won't do it. That's us. The point in a parable is for us to see ourselves. And I don't know about the rest of you. I see me in this. Yeah.
Hey, Scott,
Yes.
we won't go out unless we know, but is there an extrapolation here that, or maybe an insinuation that as the wicked servant had to pay a consequence for his previous mistake, and as Brother Gene just pointed out, that we need to obey celestial rules, not our own. Do we sit here and maybe extrapolate that there will be consequences that will be handed out by our Heavenly Father?
I told Mary, it was about 80-20 that you would try and get me on this one. So this is not unanticipated.
No, it's good.
It's good. There's a point in there where the king pulls that wicked servant back in. And he says, hey, I forgave you. You had this guy thrown in jail. And so he takes the wicked servant and says, you're going in jail and be
To be
tortured
tortured
until you repay everything,
Which
every
is
last
never.
penny, which is never. And is there an indication that there are consequences if we refuse to forgive? I will tell you that there are consequences. Does it mean that you don't go to heaven anymore? I don't think it means that. But there are consequences right here, right now. And this lack of forgiveness destroys churches. It destroys the
Families.
body. It destroys families. And I don't remember how we tied it into this, because it comes up in the next
Next
chapter
chapter.
about divorce.
Yeah.
But I'm going to say it again now. When you're going through one of those, it is not a happy time. We let ourselves get all crazy. So is there a consequence? Yes. If you're going to ask me to get into the exact mechanics of what the consequences will be, I'm unequipped to do that. I can't.
Well, the point being that, for example, if you look at some of the other teachings and someone, I think, approached Jesus and Jesus says, get away from me, I never knew you.
That's pretty serious consequence.
That's pretty serious. When you're talking about Revelation and the judgment of the goats and the lambs, that seemed pretty
It's a
consequential there too. And so to me, I understand what you're saying as far as we're forgiven because we're covered by grace, but there's a sin, and then there's willful sin. When you're acknowledged of what you should not do, yet you still do it.
willful sin. You know what to do and you still do it. First of all, what is sin?
Anything that separates us from God.
Anything that separates us from God. And willful sin, I have told Mary before, and it makes her all crazy like, but there have been
Lots of things do.
very,
I
very,
feel your pain, Mary.
there have been very few times that I did something that I didn't know it was wrong when I did it.
Right, yeah.
There are, I try to teach the kids that sometimes I look at something I've done and I say that was wrong. Sometimes I look at something I'm about to do and I say it's wrong. I'm going to do it anyway. I'm just being honest with you. What I try not to do is look at something I did wrong and say, it wasn't really wrong.
Right.
That's a thing, because there's no repentance. There is no turning away from it. Willful sin, most of it is willful sin. I don't know what to tell you. And this idea, this is a teaching that is about the body. This is going to his disciples. This is going to believers. And it says, if your brother sins against you, and it mentions going to the whole congregation. So this is the thing. These are people, I think you can say safely, this is about within the body, within believers. If we refuse to forgive someone who's part of the body, does that mean we're kicked out of heaven? We lose our forgiveness? I do not believe that. Consequences, though, there are lots and lots of consequences. And so back to the idea of what is sin, and sin is anything that separates you from God. I would kind of submit that sin is a tragedy. It is a thing that says you are separate from God. And what consequences are more dire than being separated from God, than displeasing God? That should be enough. And this, I believe, is telling them that should be enough. You should remember, because I'm teaching you this, that you've been forgiven and God expects you to forgive as well. That should be enough. And beyond that, going into the mechanics of the metaphysical stuff, I just don't have the confidence.
It's not
to weigh in.
necessarily metaphysical, it's application of the teaching.
Yes.
When you look at Paul's letter to the Romans, and he's talking to them about grace, and he says at some point, well, because, all our sins at this point in time are covered by grace, does that mean that we will sin more?
Should we sin more so that grace will be multiplied?
By no means,
We shouldn't. But the fact is that we do. And it's willful. I mean, you can't, to try and get out and say, well, I didn't really know I was doing anything wrong. Those opportunities, I think, are pretty rare. And that's an oversight. When we sin, we, generally speaking, are doing something knowingly. And if you want me, like I said, if you want to get into what are the consequences, if I fail to forgive someone, they are many. I am not going to say that we lose our forgiveness, though. I can't say that. But the consequences are often right in the here and now. The failure to forgive. Why am I spending so much time? Why are we spending so much time on this? Because this failure to forgive is one of the things that destroys us. It costs us the life more abundant that we're entitled to more than nearly anything else.
Exactly. Costing yourself.
Yeah.
And
What I closed on, I'm going to close on it again. Forgetfulness is better than forgiveness. Let go of it. To say I forgive you is not the same thing as saying I no longer, when I look at you, I don't see that anymore. That's the forgiveness that we receive, and that's what he's talking about.
But I think the last sentence tells you, no question about it. That's what that Heavenly Father is going to do. If you don't forgive, he's not going to forgive you unless you forgive your brother from your heart. I mean, he's telling you up front. I mean, I almost see it. Truly, I tell you, this is how my Father is.
Well, the big thing
that's going to happen is a whole different ball.
how it's going to happen is something I cannot weigh in on. What I would recommend is focus on the last 5 words of that. Forgive your brother from your heart. Just do it. That's the message.
And I thought that interesting question from Peter. How many times do I need to forgive? 7? It's the old teaching of precepts of the law. You got to go A, B, C, and D. 7. Well, Jesus is telling you, you got to go 7 plus. But bottom line, you got to go from the heart.
The thing that you need to hear from that when Peter comes up is what he says is, how many times Do I have to forgive if my brother sins against me? As many as 7? And that's a question. Do I really have to go as many as 7 times? And you can see him saying, I'm big enough to do that. But when you get to 8, I'm done, right? Surely there must be an end to this forgiveness thing. Surely if they keep doing it, there must be a limit to the forgiveness. And Jesus says, no, there's not. And then he goes on this big, long parable about there shouldn't be a limit to it. 20,000 years worth of wages, there's no limit. That's the message. And beyond that, I think it's disruptive to us to try and get too specific about parables. The one thing you need to know about a parable, they're not, what's the other thing? And I can't even,
Analogy.
not an analogy, but anyway, they have one point. A parable is a teaching, a story, but it has one point. Learn to get the one point out of a parable and not try and break down, like in the parable of the Good Samaritan we're fixing to hit. There are people who take that and say, well, the donkey represents this, the priest represents this. No, that's not it. A parable has one message, one teaching.
And this one is forgive your brother from your heart.
It is,
And that's very important
and it's hard.
And it's very
in
hard.
your life.
Now we go on to chapter 19. And remember this, the chapters 18 through 20 is all about teaching the disciples about this upside down kingdom and how it doesn't make sense. When Jesus had finished saying these things, he left Galilee and went into the region of Judea beyond the Jordan. Large crowds followed him and he healed them there. Then some Pharisees came and tested him by asking, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any reason?
Let's pause on that one. It's important. They're testing him. You understand, you keep in mind, they're asking him a question about divorce. There's a thing that happens in chess where you can move in such a way, it's called a fork, right? The other player is going to lose a piece. They either have to choose to lose this one or lose this one. But no matter what happens, you're going to get them, they're going to lose a piece. This is what they're trying to do with him. They're trying to set up a situation where no matter what he says, they're going to nail him. This is about divorce. And there are things in here that have touched nearly every one of us, right? And if not us, then a close family member. And keep that in mind, that this is one of those things that is going to hit close to home. So let's not get, be too quick to get offended about some of the stuff that gets said.
Jesus answered.
It's a pleasure to come to the thing, but I wish I had that map that says where's Galilee? Because now he's going to go to Judea.
Oh, yeah, do you want to?
It is, we don't have the map this time, but he's headed down. The Judea that's being talked about is sort of Israel proper, but he's headed down towards Jerusalem. He's gone from the Galilee and he's headed down into the area that would eventually take him to Jerusalem. And this is, he begins, as I've said many times, he begins to make a beeline for Jerusalem. We're going to bring that out more.
Because that's when he gets to be challenged again by the Pharisees.
All the way down, yes.
So during this,
It's being built.
during this beeline to Jerusalem, as I've said, when it's time, he makes a point of offending the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the scribes so much that by the time he gets to Jerusalem, they're ready to kill him. And this is one of those.
Then some Pharisees came and tested him by asking, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any reason? Jesus answered, have you not read that from the beginning, the Creator made them male and female and said, for this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and will be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let man not separate. Why then, they asked, did Moses order a man to give his wife a certificate of divorce and send her away? Jesus replied, Moses permitted you to divorce your wives because of your hardness of heart, and it was not this way from the beginning. Now I tell you that whoever divorces his wife except for sexual immorality and marries another woman commits adultery. His disciples said to him, if this is the case between a man and his wife, is it better not to marry? Not everyone can accept this word, he replied, but only those to whom it has been given. For there are eunuchs who were born that way, others who were made that way by men, and still others like the eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. The one who can accept this should accept it.
So they come to him and say, is it legal for a man to divorce his wife for any reason? And he says, haven't you read the scriptures where it says that a man and woman become one flesh? So if God is joined, don't let not man separate. They used to say that at wedding ceremonies. They don't say it much anymore. But he's telling them, this is not the way it was supposed to be. And they fire back. This is what they always had planned. If he had said yes, then they would have nailed him another way. But when he says it's not the way it's supposed to be, why then did Moses instruct, or did he say command? Order. Why did Moses order men to get a certificate of divorce? That's called a get. Why did he tell them to get this certificate and then send the wife away? And what Jesus says, and Mary rightly emphasized, Jesus comes back and says, basically, Moses didn't order you to do that. He permitted you to do it because of the hardness of your hearts. This is not the way it was supposed to be. And yet, when he realized you're doing it anyway, he says, at least you're going to have to go through this process and get a certificate of divorce. But it ain't the way it's supposed to be. And
one of the things we talked about, because both of us, as you know, our past, both of us are divorced. And this is the second marriage for both of us. And we know that, and then, there's always some people that go to the second part, well, you can get a divorce and remarry if you do X and Y and Z. Bottom line, you guys, it's not the way it was supposed to be. Anybody who's been through the divorce knows it was an awful time, and it's not the way it was supposed to be. We have this hierarchy of sin and hierarchy. This is worse than this. It was definitely a time of being separated from God because you were so mad and life was so yucky. It was not supposed to be.
so people will say, well, is it a sin? I've been asked that by people who were in one of our classes. Is it a sin? Well, if we say it's whatever separates you from God, if you've been through it, ask yourself, did that separate you from God? Did it draw you closer to God? I'm going to say no. I think I can just speak without hesitation. It did not bring you closer to God going through the divorce. So does it involve sin? Yes, it does. One of the things, because people pick this apart so bad, when he says that if a man divorces his wife for any reason other than sexual immorality, this is the way they talked about the men and not the women, we just have to live with it, commits adultery, okay? Just a few chapters ago, I want to remind you that he says, you've heard it said, you shouldn't commit adultery. You shall not commit adultery. But I say, if you've even looked at another woman in lust, you've committed adultery, right? So there are much easier ways to commit adultery than this, than getting a divorce and doing these things. If that's your goal, you can get there quickly. The end result of both things is you've committed adultery. These people that he says, if you've looked at a woman in lust, you've committed adultery. You're guilty of the same thing. So there is a whole bunch of guilt out there on this. This is not the unpardonable sin. I love the fact that he says, this is not the way it was from the beginning. This is not good for you. This involves sin. This involves separating you from God. It's not right. And Moses gave you this certificate because you're doing it anyway. So at least said you've got to go to the local religious leaders, and they're not going to hand out a certificate at the drop of a hat. We have now reached a point where it's no fault divorce, and all you have to do is go down and say, I would like you to make this not exist anymore, and it's done. It's unhealthy. I don't think anyone can argue that this is not bad for us, for society, for everything. It is sin that separates us from God. Now we have to deal with that just like every other thing that separates us from God.
I would like to, as far as the sin that's in that divorce, the divorce is what allows you to separate yourself from all that sin.
Well,
I
yeah,
mean, because, apparently in the divorce, there's a lot of sin that gets you to that point where you feel like you need to get.
you are correct. There are several things
That sets you free.
I had intended to get into. One of them is, I will not be the one who tells you that if someone is being abused, they have to stay and continue to be abused. Okay, there are ministers who say that you may not leave this person.
Yeah.
Those words will not come out of my mouth. And if I'm wrong, I told Mary, if I'm wrong, I will pay the price for it.
Right.
If there's a punishment for saying the wrong thing, then I'll live with it, because I will not tell you that someone needs to stay around and be abused. Larry made a point that the thing that gets us to the point of divorce involves a bunch of other sin. There are a bunch of other things wrong that bring us to that junction. And sometimes it's the only way to clean up the mess. Probably true. When we let ourselves get to that point. This, though, is a test
Of Jesus.
of Jesus. And don't forget that what they're trying to do is to get him to weigh in on something so that they can discredit him. And don't forget that he says, you've committed adultery if you do this, but he's already said you've committed adultery if you do this other thing. It's not good. It is unhealthy for us. It is right and just if we don't let this happen. Try and find another way. But
The
Larry,
last chapter about, or the last paragraph about not being married at all.
and then, and that brings us, we'll probably have just about enough time.
Well, I've already read it right there.
Yep. So after he says this to the Pharisees, his disciples come to him, and I want you to see how steeped they are in Jewish law and Jewish tradition. Because he said, if you do this, you've committed adultery. And the disciples come and say, if this is true, it's better not to get married at all. Well, what does that mean? It means they're thinking what you just said is too hard. The idea of not divorcing, they have gotten so used to the idea of you get a certificate and it's over, that they see this and say, this is really restrictive. If I've got to try and stay in the marriage, that's too much. It would be better to just not get married. These guys are they're indoctrinated, and they have things that they have to unlearn. And don't we see that fairly often? This is them reacting to what they have become accustomed to. And they say it'd be better not to get married at all. And Jesus says, well, the truth is, you're probably right. Paul later tells people that are going to become apostles, they're going to go out, it would be better if you didn't get married. Now, he knows that Peter was married, and I don't know, several of he knows
Paul
they're
was
married.
married.
Paul himself was married. But he's saying it would be better if you weren't, because you're going to be doing a thing that'll take you out and maybe never come home, and it's a distraction, etc. So what Jesus says is, guys, yeah, it comes with some difficult things, being married and staying married. He says there are people who are eunuchs from birth, and there are people who are made that way, and there are still others who choose to live like eunuchs for the service to God, right? Same thing Paul is saying to do. But he goes on to say, not everyone can accept this. Not everyone could do this. And the way he phrases it, he's not saying not everyone chooses. He's saying not everyone can do this. So the thing that I kind of wanted you to see, though, was their reaction, because what he has just told the Pharisees is, you're not supposed to get divorced. And these guys, these 12, have been lived with this so much that divorce has become easy. You just go get a certificate, and it freaks them out. They say, oh my gosh, if what you just said is true, it would be better not to even get married at all. That says where they are. And so there are times where we've had these discussions about them not fully understanding Jesus's teachings. Yeah, at this point, they don't. And this is one of those examples where they never expected him to say that it's not okay to just go get a divorce with a certificate. It has some implications for us, I suppose. Anything else?
No, that's
Just
we can do one more
real
session.
quick detail. At 10, his disciples said to him, are we talking about the disciples that became the apostles, or are we talking about the disciples as everybody was following, trying to follow his teaching?
Sometimes it's hard to
What disciples are
separate.
that when he's coming back, because he's now in Judea, right? I mean, he's got to have more disciples over there.
Sometimes it's hard to separate. He's been dealing with the 12 in this section. I think it's pretty obvious that he's been preparing them for what they're going to be. They're going to be these apostles. They're going to be the ones that spread the gospel. But could there have been other disciples around? There could be. And we're not told. I would look at this, and in my mind, I see the 12. But could there have been others? Sure.
Would you just?
And that's what my first impression, but if the Pharisees are there, obviously it's a kind of an open forum,
Sure.
and he's lecturing.
The Pharisees come with these traps,
Right.
and they like it when there are a lot of people there, because in their mind, this is like a political gotcha, do an interview and try and trap somebody. They want to do it to discredit him. They want to show people, see, he's not teaching you God's words. He's doing his own thing. So yeah, it's an open forum, and they explicitly want a lot of people there.
And they hit him pretty hard. I'm sorry. They hit him pretty hard, says, your own man, Moses, said that divorce is okay.
That's right.
I mean, that's pretty hard for him.
They want, then they think they're going to force him to contradict Moses, which will discredit him.
But I mean, to me, I always think about the actual times. What the Jews and everybody had to that point was the law.
True.
It was how many, 400, 600 years of the law. And here comes Jesus Christ, who is presenting not obviously a rightful message, but something that completely, in some instances, contradicts part of the law, and they're ingrained into the law.
Yes.
So it's hard for them in their human condition to see anything but what's been inherited for years and years and years,
The law is ingrained in them. And I hope you at home can hear this when they're talking. We've worked on that. But Mario's saying they're so steeped in the law, it's so ingrained that they can't imagine anything else at this point.
But and I will challenge us. We're steeped in some of the religious traditions, denominational teachings, whatever, and that's why we feel strongly to go back to the Bible, that we've also been steeped in them, and sometimes we lose sight of some of the.
Lots of us have grown up in denominations, churches that have their own traditions that we find sort of don't agree with the scriptures that we have. I pay a lot of attention to the red letters, to Jesus' words, And when I see something being taught that contradicts that, I get, all itchy, because that's, I mean, that's pretty important stuff. That's exactly the condition that these disciples were in. They've been taught something, and we are infused with our culture. There are things that they tell us, it's just the norm. You just kind of have to live with it. And we've got to make some decisions. Do we accept that or do we not?
Let me read 13 and 15, 13 through 15, and we'll stop there. Then the little children were brought to Jesus for him to place his hands on them and pray for them. And the disciples rebuked those who brought them. But Jesus said, "Let the little children come to me, and do not hinder them, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these." And after he had placed his hands on them, he went on from there.
And so here we have people bringing their children for Jesus to lay hands on and bless. And that laying on hands is something we've gotten largely uncomfortable with. I mean, some people are still comfortable with it, but you see that. But they're bringing their children for him to bless. And the disciples, these faithful 12, are saying, don't take up this man's valuable time just blessing some little rugrats, They rebuked them. And Jesus says, "Let the children come to me." That's we wind up at times seeing people as not being worthy of our time. These 12 are trying to be his gatekeeper. If you've ever tried to get a hold of someone important, they have a gatekeeper, they have a receptionist, and their job is to keep you from getting in touch with them. And so he tells them, "Let the little children come, and do not hinder them, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these." And that means, once again, the kingdom of heaven belongs to ones like these. Those who come, didn't he say last week, who come like children? If you're going to keep the children away, you're going to keep the drug addicts away. You're going to keep the homeless people away. You're going to keep the people who don't merit our time away. That's the lesson for us. We are the 12. And we like to decide that some people are simply not worthy. I've actually heard someone say that person doesn't deserve to hear the gospel. I've heard those words. I had someone that I grew up in a denomination. When someone makes their decision, they accept Jesus as Savior, they go up to the front at the end. And everybody comes by and shakes hands with them, right? Mm-hmm. One of the matriarchs of the church, and this was a guy, his name was Steve. He had lived through the late 60s and 70s to the fullest. Steve had a rough life. He had hair down to here. He dressed, he was dirty, and yet Steve had that faith. And he had the courage to come forward and profess his faith in front of all of these people. And this woman comes up, she's a matriarch of the church, and she says, "I just want to tell you, I think it's great that you've trusted Jesus as your Savior, but I don't appreciate you coming into my Lord's house dressed like that."
Oh my God.
Yep. Those words, they are burned into my memory. "I don't appreciate you coming into my Lord's house dressed like that." They were trying to be the gatekeepers. And she honestly would have preferred not that he go home and cut his hair and dress up, but that he just quit coming. I have heard these words, a guy who was a pest in a children's Sunday school. And they treated him so bad, and they said, eventually he'll just quit coming. They said the words. That's what this is. And we're supposed to see in what the disciples did ourselves, and the fact that what Jesus says is, let them come, because the kingdom of heaven is made of, such as these. It's important for us, huh?
Belongs to
Such as these.
And we are time,
We are at time.
past time.
God, we ask for hearts that see in these stories, in these words, to see ourselves. The message that you left for us of who we're supposed to be. The forgiveness that we're supposed to bestow because of what we've received. And the fact that we're not supposed to harbor grudges, but forgive to forget the same way you've forgiven and put aside our own sins. And that we're not supposed to be gatekeepers to decide who's worthy of hearing your gospel. We're thankful that you forgave us. And the thing I would ask today is the heart to recognize that and bestow even a small portion of what you've given us to those people that you send into our lives. Amen. And Lisa, we'll keep you in prayers because it sounds like you really want to do this thing. So that's the other thing we would ask is that you get the thing that you want out of this. So good luck tomorrow.
Okay, everybody can.
Thank you so much.
Unmute yourself, and Julie, keep us informed. Have your sister text me or Bob text me after your surgery.
Will do.
Okay, good deal. You guys are thinking about you, Cindy. Safe drive back to Houston again. See you guys. Have a great week.
Y'all have a great Sunday.
That's right.